Hello, and welcome to the final event in our series on cultural diversity in children's books. I know it won't be our last event on cultural diversity or indeed on children's books, but in this series, it is the final one. And it's lovely to see so many of you joining us on a lovely summer's evening. I'm Deirdre from Five Leaves Bookshop, and today we're welcoming Miriam Halahmy and Sita Brahamachari. And we have got BSL signing from Lauren Lister. So the format of the evening will be, there'll be some dialogue between me and our two readers and writers, and they'll tell us something about their books and we'll have a chat about them. And they will do some reading. And there'll be a Q&A. So if you have questions for the writers, please put them in the Q&A box. You are, of course, welcome to join in the chat box, but because we're busy with our conversation here, we won't be keeping an eye on the chat. But do let us know where you're coming from and indeed where you're listening in from. So, oh yes, Simon will put in buying links for the books as well. So to introduce our writers, we've got Sita Brahamachari. She's a writer of award-winning children's books and young adult novels and short stories. She has an MA in arts education and a background in theatre education, including a celebrated adaptation of Shaun Arrival. She's an Amnesty Ambassador, was an online writer in residence for Book Trust, and is writer in residence at Islington Centre for Refugees and Migrants. Miriam Halahmy writes contemporary and historical realistic fiction for children, teens, and adults. She's a frequent guest at book festivals, conferences, and colleges and schools. During the pandemic, Miriam developed videos of her books for her YouTube channel, so do check that out. And she carries out virtual visits on a regular basis, including, of course, this one. So, if we start with hearing something about your books and some reading. Sita, could you read an extract from Corey's Rock and tell us a bit about it without giving too much away of the plot?
Okay, so just to say, this is my Otter-Barry book. It's a very precious book to me, and it's a book that has come out of 8 years of working together with Jane Ray, the wonderful illustrator at Islington Centre for Refugees and Migrants. It's a story that goes right back to my childhood and my love of selfies. It's also a story that connects with working with refugee people today and watching those scenes that we have all seen of families and children in the Mediterranean washing up from the sea. It's about how children are navigating today's world, and I wanted to talk about loss on many different levels in this story, and I wanted to offer the selfie story as a kind of healing story for children today. So Deirdre's there, and with her lovely Scottish accent, I've written a story where Isla leaves Edinburgh and goes up to Orkney, and in my head, when I'm hearing her speak, she speaks it with a soft Edinburgh accent. I can't do that, but I will approximate the voice I hear in my head and the voice I heard in my head when I wrote. We stand on the grey rock of our new home, the four of us at sunset. 4 is an even number. Mum, Dad, me and Sultan. But everything feels odd. Stroking Sultan's hair and watching the surface where nothing breaks but waves. Time to say goodbye, Mum says. She hands me petals and more to Dad. We raise our hands to scatter them across the sea. The rose that's supposed to mean we say goodbye to Corey, my brother. We watch him float away, a petal for every birthday. One by one, by one, by one, by one. 5 red petals glow the fire horizon. we'll call this Corey's Rock, Dad said. I followed the red dot far out to the world's end, calling for Corey, my voice, the wind's voice, the seas sway, all melt away, and the petals grow heavy and sink into the ink of death. Corey! I call. I hit my head against the bedpost. Through bleary eyes, I search for the reason I am here. And nothing is where it should be, not even the door. The windows have shrunk into painted brick walls. I lift my head from my pillow, and now I remember the half-unpacked trunk in the corner, below the window with the patterns of yellow daffodils that only make me feel sadder. Corey loved daffodils. I creep down the rickety stairs where Mum and Dad sit close in the fire's glow, steam rising from their cups, Sultan warming their feet, Mum reading, Dad sleeping, the TV is come to silence. These are the things we did in our old flat with Corey, but now they feel strange, as if we are pretending he never was. My eyes are caught by a rolling wave. Am I still dreaming? On the screen, seals washing, swash in from the sea. Fishermen rush to the shore, not with nets, but with blankets. Dad stirs and watches the passing pictures. Searching for the remote, he mutters, "Shipwreck. Here I am, digging up the ancient boats, and now new ones washing in." The seals wash up, one by one, by one, by one. An old man reaches down and pulls back a skin. And underneath, my breath flies out of me. There is a boy's face. Corey! I say his name out loud. Dad jumps up and hits his head on the roof. Doesn't fit in our new house. Now I see the seals have turned into people, washed up on the shore. The fishermen are saving them, wrapping them in blankets. Turn it off, movie. I'd like to hide away and bury my head in poetry. Now we all sit close on the cliff. Me, Mum, and Dad, wrapped in a soft grey blanket with Sultan at our feet. I think maybe Corey will find his way to us, back across the sea, through the silence, and climb up close so that we can be 5 again. Even feels odd. The screen goes blank. Come to sleep now, Dad says. He wraps me in the blanket and lifts me high. You look all snuggly as a seal cub, Mum says. She smiles, but I don't believe her. Inside, she's tiny. She's always fine. I saw the selkies wash in from the sea. That boy looked like Corey, Dad. Is that why Mum's so sad? Expect so. Dad has to duck to carry me up the stairs. He looks like a giant in this house. I didn't know there were African selkies. I sigh as I lay my head down. Dad strokes my hair, like he used to stroke Corey's to get him to sleep. I was the eldest when Corey was alive. Am I too old for a bedtime story? If I am, when I listen close, I can hear the call of the sea. See the 5 red petals floating to me, and the boy seal with Corey's face calling. I close my eyes. Tell me the story of the selkies again, I whisper, and I am taken away to the stream of Dad's love. I am outside the croft, peering in through the window. Mum, Dad, and Sultan sit by the fire. How do you look so cozy? I want to scream. The wind begins to stir, catching my anger in its roar. I run along the cliff, down the winding path, along the beach to Corey's Rock. The wind smears hair over my face like a veil. I pull it aside to make a partner, and there he is, waving his head above the water, coming out at me. His huge dark eyes lit in the moon's glow, gliding towards me, his silver back arched and glinting. I kneel at the water's edge and stir the salt sea. He should have reached me by now. Corey! Corey! I call to him over and over. The wind drops, the sea grows black, no reflections of the water, no silver back, no salty sand, no Corey. When I wake, Daddy's gone. He's wrapped me in Corey's blanket. I touch the smooth surface, my eyes, and dry my tears. I open the daffodil curtains onto a misty dawn. The path to Corey's rock is lonely. The selfie book lies open beside my bed. The floor is cold to me. I slip on my sheepskin boots. I pass the door where Mum and Dad are sleeping. Dad's gentle snore rumbles the walls. I feel my way down each rickety stair. Sultan whines and waits on the bottom step. The wood burner glows, and by the stove my rocking chair is empty, but tipping back and forth. The chair where me and Corey used to curl up rocks all on its own while the house sleeps. I open the door. The humid swirls in. Sometimes stand and feel as I squint down the path. I take a step, and then another. Sultan trails my feet. My feet are pulling me to Corey's rock. Faster and faster they draw me along as if someone needs me. Over the bank, the full force of the sea blast lifts me like a kite, propelling me towards Corey's rock, flying me forward. The sea is all spray and fake, breaking waves today. No flatness. I climb up on the rock. Now, but still, no Corey waiting for me. The rock is covered by this stranger, like smooth grey leather. The underside is velvet, like the inside of a pea pod. I lift it up. It's as heavy as corn. I take it in my arms and carry it home. The skin that the sea has shed in place of red petals under my brother. I am wrapped in the day I first held baby Corey. His birthday, before we knew that he wouldn't live for long. Mum's words at his funeral echo in my head. 5 years was so much more than we could have wished for. I wish for more. 5 red petals is not enough. I wish that I could hold baby Corey, that everything could start all over again. On Corey's rock, a new wave breaks. One by one by one by one, the waves roll in, returning the petals and the message. Wrap yourself in softly skin. Listen to the call within. I lift the skin and place it on my shoulder. Then I stand and listen as the waves sing the song of the sea. Wrap yourself in silky skin. Listen to the call within. For the longest time, nothing makes the rhyme of the wind.
Beautiful reading, Sita. It's a very beautiful book. I do encourage you all to buy it. The pictures are so amazing. Miriam, you're going to tell us about Saving Hanno and read something from us.
Yes, thank you, Deirdre. It's lovely to be here tonight. So my book, Saving Hanno, is actually my latest publication. It came out, it was launched on Holocaust Memorial Day this year, January the 27th. And it's the story of Rudi, a 9-year-old German Jewish boy who comes on the Kindertransport to England with his sister Lottie, who is 15. They come in 1939. And Rudi is, of course, scared and lonely, but most of all, he misses his little dog, Hanno. And this book is beautifully illustrated by Karin Littlewood, and I'll show you another illustration in a minute. Hanno has been brought to England already and is in quarantine, and Rudi won't see him for 6 months. And after he comes out, he's brought to live with Rudi's foster parents. But Rudi is going to have to be very brave because he's going to have to save his dog 2 more times. So I'm going to read you from chapter 4, an extract. And this is when Rudi and Lottie come on the train. And here is the wonderful illustration by Karin showing Rudi with his little suitcase and the Nazi soldiers out the window, seeing them off. We have to get the train, and Mutti makes us wear everything we can put on. Soon I'm weighed down with 3 jumpers and a coat 2 sizes too big. Mutti says I'll grow into it. Don't they have clothes in England? At least I can hide things under all those layers. I stuff my notebook up the sleeve of one of my jumpers, and at the last minute I grab Papa's bugle. I really need something special from home. You can't see it under this coat. I wish I could have hidden Hanno there too. When will I see home again? And how will Hanno find where I'm living in England, I wonder, as Lottie and I walk with Mutti and Papa to the station. It's a sunny morning and the leaves on the linden trees are beginning to bud. Normally, I'd run down the street, but today I have far too many clothes on and I can hardly walk. The station is crazy. Hundreds of families are crying and hugging each other. The parents aren't allowed onto the platform, so we have to say our goodbyes at the barrier. Mutti and Papa kiss me and Lottie, and then we walk away holding hands. Goodbye, my darlings, goodbye. I hear Mutti call over and over until her voice is swallowed by the noise. My eyes fill with tears, but Lottie squeezes my hand and whispers, think about seeing Hanno. That helps a bit. We get into a carriage near the front. It's so crammed with kids, I have to sit on Lottie's lap, which feels really babyish. It takes ages before the train leaves, and Lottie whispers, what if they don't let us leave? Why wouldn't they? I whisper back. Lottie is staring out of the window at a Nazi soldier with a rifle. He catches her eye, and suddenly he points the barrel straight at our window and pretends to pull the trigger. Lottie's mouth falls open into a big, round "oh," and the soldier throws his head back, laughing. I hate the Nazis, I whisper. I hope they all drown like the Egyptians in the Red Sea. That makes Lottie grin, and I feel better. At least when I get to England, I'll be in the same country as Hanno. Finally, the train pulls out, but no one cheers because Nazi soldiers are patrolling through. They come into our carriage and grab a suitcase and tip everything out onto the floor. There's a tin whistle caught in a sock, and a soldier grabs it and yells, everyone knows the rules. You were told to bring nothing except clothes. Who's stealing from the fatherland? It's only a whistle. I don't think the Germans will starve without it. A boy in a brown jacket stands up and says, sorry, sir, it was a mistake. And he's shaking like the branches on the linden trees in a storm. You're the mistake, Jew boy, blasts the soldier. Then he picks up the boy's things and throws them out the window. I can feel the bugle pressing onto my chest and my heart is thumping like a drum. If he searches me, he might be so angry he'll throw me out of the window, I think. But the soldier goes away. Imagine if I had brought Hanno and he'd been discovered. The train chugs on, mile after mile, and I begin to feel hungry, but Lottie won't let me eat the sandwiches Mutti made in case there's no more food today. It's so hot under all my layers of clothes, and my stomach won't stop rumbling. Last night, when we sat down to our very last dinner together, Papa said, remember you are Jewish wherever you live or go to school, and don't eat any sausages put in muti. Why not, I said. In England, all the sausages are pork, muttered Lottie. At least we don't keep kosher. Which is true, but we all love Friday nights. Mutti lights the candles and says the Hebrew prayer. Then Papa chants the prayers over the bread and wine. Papa went over the prayers with us again last night, so that you never forget them, he said with a stern look in his face. But what if I do forget, I couldn't help thinking. Who will I ask in England? Mutti said Mr. and Mrs. Evans aren't Jewish, so I can't ask them. And what should I do if they make me eat pork? The train goes on, and then ages after our normal lunchtime, it stops at a tiny station. We look out of the window and see the Nazi soldiers getting off. There's a short wait before the train pulls away again, but all the soldiers are still standing around on the platform, smoking and laughing. Why didn't they get back on the train, I asked Lottie. I think we're at the border, she says. We all press our faces against the glass, and sure enough, a few minutes later, the train slides out of Nazi Germany and into Holland. Lottie pushes me off her lap and throws herself to her feet and cries out, now we're free, no more Hitler, no more yellow stars. She reaches over to the star on my coat and rips it off, and then her own. All the other kids copy her, and soon there's a pile of stars on the carriage floor, trampled under our shoes. The train stops in a station. Smiling Dutch people give out hot chocolate and sandwiches and fruit. We stuff ourselves before the train sets off again. I show Lottie my notebook. I'm making notes for Mutti and Papa, I say. I think she'll laugh at me, but she just says, well, it's a good thing the soldiers didn't find that. You could have got into so much trouble. She's right, of course, but I don't say so. And then I write. Only pack clothes or the soldiers will be angry. Pull off your yellow star when you cross the border. The Dutch make delicious hot chocolate. The train comes to the sea and we have to take a boat to England, then another train to London, and we come out at a station called Liverpool Street. We're told to sit and wait. We have huge labels around our necks, which makes me feel like a bit of lost luggage. Some children are collected quite quickly, but it's ages before anyone comes for us. Then a kind-looking man comes over and says he is Herr Evans. The English word for Herr is Mr, Lottie says, and we should go with him. We have to take a bus, and Lottie whispers to me there's no room for her at the Evanses. I'm going to live with a couple called the Greens nearby, she says. I'll be all alone with them, and I don't speak English, I whisper back, my bottom lip beginning to wobble. I'll come and see you as much as I can, says Lottie, but her face is very pale. It's late by the time we reach the Evanses' house. Lottie gives me a quick kiss on the cheek, and then she disappears. I stand in the hallway with my tiny suitcase, and I can feel tears again. It's all so different from our flat in Frankfurt. There's a staircase leading upstairs, but it's dark up there, and it looks quite scary. And there's a funny smell too. But Frau Evans gives me a nice smile, and pointing to herself, she says, Auntie Irene. And then she points to Herr Evans and says, Uncle Don. They're years older than Mutti and Papa. A bit like grandparents, I suppose. They don't have any children, Mutti says, and I can't see any pets either. Uncle Don points to my coat, so I take it off. And he raises his eyebrows when he sees the bugle, but he doesn't say anything. And then I take off 2 of my 3 jumpers, and that makes him smile. His eyes are light grey, and they crinkle up in a kind way. I keep the notebook in my secret place up my sleeve. We go into the kitchen, and Auntie Irene shows me where to sit, and she even lets me put my bugle on the table next to me. She puts down a cup of what looks like milky coffee, but when I drink some, it's tea with so much milk and sugar, it tastes horrible. I only drink milk or water at home. Uncle Don is cutting some bread. At least it looks like a loaf of bread, but it's white. He puts butter and jam on a slice and gives it to me. The jam tastes nice, and I eat 3 slices. But when Auntie Irene wants me to pour some more tea, I put my hand over the cup and shake my head. And all the time, they're talking English to each other, and sometimes to me. On the train, Lottie taught me yes, no, please, and thank you. But apart from these words and tea, which is almost the same in German, I can't understand a word, and it makes me feel so lonely. Finally, Auntie Irene takes me upstairs to my new bedroom. She helps me find my pajamas in my suitcase, and I change for bed. Then she gives me a kiss on my cheek and strokes the hair on my forehead for a minute. I like that. Mutti used to do that sometimes. Then she goes out and closes the door, and I'm all alone. My new bedroom's cold with big dark furniture. The bed's lumpy and the sheets are all scratchy, and nothing feels or smells or looks like home. A dog barks outside in the street, and it makes me think of Hanno's warm body resting on my legs. How long do I have to stay here, I think, and finally tears pour down my face. I can't hold them back any longer. Papa's bugle is on the side table with the soft rag next to it. The rag was torn off an old shirt of Papa's. I wipe my eyes on my pyjama sleeve, wrap the rag around the bugle, and tuck it into bed with me. I lie there, and then I remember I have to be a pioneer. So I pick up my notebook and write. They have white bread in England. Tea must have milk and sugar in it, or it's poisonous, I think. Sit upstairs on the bus. It's unbelievable.
Thanks, Miriam. I love the way you work the humour and so much information into the story. Sita, in a different way, you're retelling an old story that uses an old folk tale. It's the Selkie story. Can you tell us about why you chose that as a theme running through your story?
Yeah, so I first heard the Selkie story when I was very little, and I grew up in the Lake District, and like a lot northern, we went further north on holiday, so we went to Edinburgh, and then we sometimes would go up to Orkney. And the picture in Corey's Rock, which I am lucky enough to have here, of Isla and her dad standing on the rock and looking out to sea, is a picture of that really reminds me of standing with my dad on a beach in Orkney, looking out to sea. And in that picture, Isla has her hand on her dad's back. I don't know if you can see that from here. But it's one of my favourite pictures in the book because it's such a picture of empathy. The child is touching the dad's back and he's looking out to sea. And he's kind of imagining his family somewhere else. And so I saw that and I kind of felt that emotion. And then my dad told me a Selkie story. So we found a Selkie book. He told me the Selkie story. So I think he thought that that was a good way to help his children kind of understand this idea of a close family and a far away family. Because his childhood was in Calcutta. In his story, Isla's dad, his grandfather, it comes from Nigeria. So she's never been there. So this idea of looking over the sea, and then the child in that space between, on that horizon, trying to imagine what it's like for that father to be, or grandfather to be part of another culture and another history. And so, because I had such a wild imagination, even as a child, I did go to sleep, like Isla in the story, and dreamt up a story of a seal coming out of the sea that could be a relation of my dad coming out of the sea, wrapping myself in that Selkie skin, because the story of the Selkie is that, you know, humans fall in love with the Selkie and want them for themselves. So they want them to become human. And so they kind of take the skin and they keep the skin for themselves. But the Selkie can never be free while it's on land, and so it has to return to sea. So this idea of culture and identity and history and flow, and knowing that the sea was what my father crossed to come to this country, always located the sea as a really important part of my imagination. And I realized that I've written so much about water and sea and oceans in a lot of my books.
Oh, Yes. Right. Well, thank you. You can see the connection there. It's a story I knew when I was growing up because it's in Irish folklore too. Um, Miriam, there's a contemporary resonance to your story too, that you've reworked this old story. I suppose the bones of it would be familiar of the World War II Kindertransport, but you've connected this with the contemporary refugee story. I think lots of people will see the echoes. Can you tell
Yes,
us a bit about that?
I think that the parallel has become so much more poignant in modern times. Because I think that people sort of saw the Kindertransport as the children who were being saved from the Holocaust. It was started after Kristallnacht, when the Jews were attacked all over Germany, and there were lobbies in Parliament here to bring Jewish children in. But of course, these children are victims of the Holocaust, and they are refugees. And they have to make their way in a strange country, and that's something that I try to show in my book, because Rudi is actually only 8 when he arrives. He turns 9. And I think a lot of people know that Lord Alf Dubs was himself a Kindertransport child. He was a Winton child. He was rescued from Czechoslovakia by Nicholas Winton. He came as a 6-year-old, and he and many of the Kindertransport people who are alive today and their families have wanted to highlight the plight of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in Europe, on the continent. And Alf Dubs has been over to Calais himself and talked to these children, and they have been lobbying the British Parliament to allow larger numbers to come in than currently are allowed in. So the parallels, I think, are very, very powerful, because we are in the middle of a massive refugee crisis in the world today. And so I've also, all my working life as a teacher, I worked with refugee children when they were coming in from Somalia and from the Middle East and from all over. And I've done a lot of creative writing with adult asylum seekers and refugees. So those stories have always been very important to me. This story came out of another book I wrote called The Emergency Zoo, which was about the culling of the animals at the outbreak of the Second World War. 750,000 pets were put down. And people, it's a bit of a little known story. So I decided to write a book about it. And while I was researching, I found the records of this letter from 2 German Jewish children who had written to a British animal charity and said, we have a place on the train, it's 1939, so obviously they're coming on the Kindertransport, we can't bring our dog, and anyway, we can't afford to pay for quarantine. They obviously must have arranged for the dog to go separately, and the charity records in the records that they paid for the quarantine, which was like 13 guineas. I mean, it's a huge amount of money. I thought, gosh, there was a Kindertransport dog. There was a dog connected to Kindertransport. And so that story appears in the Emergency Zoo. And then I was encouraged to write this as a separate story for slightly younger children. And there's, in fact, people have told me who are in Holocaust education that there is very little this is for 7+, and there's very little published for children on this subject. And yet we know that every year in school, they're doing work around Holocaust Memorial Day. So they need the experience of a child and their reaction to it to come alive in fiction, I think, to help them to walk in the shoes of what it was like for these Jewish children. And then, of course, the parallels with any child today is there.
Yeah, really important stories being told from both of you. I'm going to ask you now about the formats. Sita, your story, it's a picture book. It uses free verse. There's, the picture and the words. You've got poetry and prose. Can you tell us about that blending of forms and genre, which is really interesting in the book?
Yeah, so coming from a background in theatre and sort of adapting Shaun Pan's The Arrival for theatre, the approach that Jane Ray and I took to create this book was really like a call and response approach. So that I wrote the text, and then she would offer an image, and then sometimes I removed the text because the image spoke. So there are certain sort of pages where it's just this beautiful imagery and just a few words, 1, 2, 3, she runs across the beach. And so I'm a writer that really believes that children need stories, need image. As forever, really, we all need image. I love to see an image myself in a book and illustration. And so so what we talked about a lot once I'd written the story was how I could pare the words down to become jewels, and then to speak with these intense and beautiful images that Jane was creating. And I was also, with the form of it, also moving between when Isla is in a very confused and grieved state in the story, and she's just moved house, she's lost her little brother, and she's struggling with her culture and history and identity in this place. So she's in a sort of strange dream-like space, and we often don't know in the story when she's dreaming and when she's awake. And it kind of slips, and it almost slips like the wave kind of slips in her imagination between reality and dreaming. The seal being a seal and the seal being her little brother. And then there's moments where she goes to school and she's in the playground and it goes into prose. So we were really fluid in the way that we developed the style of the piece. It worked more like a piece of theatre than it did like writing a novel. It's been an absolute collaboration between Jane and I since we started working together 8 years ago. And we're just about to publish our third book, Swallow's Kiss, which is for younger children, about the meeting of a refugee child and a migrant child and the connections between them. A story that you very rarely see. And it's inspired by the Refugee Centre we work in. And the way that we work there is to offer an image and for people to then comment on this image, bringing their culture and their histories and their references about the symbolic world to this image. And then what I do is I do a sort of communal listening, and I place those words down on a page like a poem. And that's really how I've placed the words down for Corey's Rock. So it really has come out of our practice, this way of writing.
Interesting. The picture's a great way to communicate, not just with children, but with adults who are learning English or not that familiar with the language. Miriam, you've got a blend of forms too. Saving Hanno, you've got the historical novel, you've got the diary form that you're using for the boy telling his story. You've also got these little snippets where he's writing messages for his parents' advice. Can you tell us about this interweaving of forms that you have?
Right. So yes, it's a historical novel, but you know, young children, they live very much in the present. It's, you know, it's very, very immediate what they're experiencing, and what they're feeling, and what they're not necessarily thinking ahead and thinking back like an older child, teenager, or an adult. They're reacting to what they see and hear and feel in front of them. And so I chose first person present tense so that you're with Rudi every inch of the way. Now there are flashbacks, but in effect, he's sort of talking really. So I suppose it could be a diary, or it's just his running thoughts inside his head, you know. And I also use humor because I think when you're telling a very difficult story, and also even children in the worst situation, you know, they will see if something makes them laugh, it makes them laugh, or if something funny comes into their head, or, you know, or something annoying, like at one point, you know, they're in a really difficult point, and then he just goes, "Oh, sisters," you know, they're always like that. And that is, you know, I think how children will be. So that was very important to me. But one of the things, because I obviously talked to people who had come on the Kindertransport, and one of the things I heard more than once is that with these very young children, their parents would say to them, they would say, "I don't want to go without you, Mum and Dad." And they would say, "Well, you're going to go first. You're going to be our pioneer, and you're going to find out everything so that when we come over, you can tell us everything." Now, we know that in the vast majority of cases, they never saw their parents again. But this gave the trigger for the idea of, you know, it gives Rudi this focus of, I'll make notes for mum and dad. And again, the notes give me a chance, if I haven't had a chance to inject some humor, like he's so desperately lonely in that bedroom on his first night. And then he says, go upstairs on the bus, it's unbelievable. And that's sort of in capital letters. I can sort of show the way in which they've put that in the book, you see. So for children, we have to think all the time, like, you know, this is a story that I want, maybe even, you know, advanced 6-year-olds might read. So how am I going to balance a Holocaust story, you know, with, you know, where they are as children?
Really got me gripped. The story, or the title of Corey's Rock, I mean, the landscape is so important in this, from, you know, the title itself says it. Can you tell us about how you relate to the landscape? I mean, you mentioned the picture there.
Yeah, I mean, there's another image here of Isla on the rock, and it's about, I think, what I was thinking and what I was feeling in Orkney a very long time ago, and what I was remembering when I wrote this story was how I was asking the question about how people connect to their landscape. And I used to feel when we went to Orkney that we really belonged in that place. And so what I remember doing as a child is, as children do on the beach, collecting the elements, the starfish and the stones and the feeling the sand, a very tactile experience and memory of that place. I remember hearing that it was a site of great archaeological importance, and that there were these Viking ships. Isla's dad is going to work on Otter-Barry. And so I remember thinking that the landscape is one thing, where you walk is one place, and then underneath, you know, a bit like Miriam was talking about, you know, we're living one history now, but, you know, she looks at the news and she sees the seals, refugee children on these boats, and that's what she's connecting to. But underneath, there's this whole history of migration into that place. And I used to feel that a lot when I was a child. And I used to feel that a lot in places like Orkney by the sea, where there was this space. One of the things that I mean, this will always be a treasure book for me, is the space that is given to the horizon for children in this book. So like Miriam said, you know, there's also sections of the book which is quite funny, where, you know, Isla goes to school and she meets other people, and, you know, you really see her internal world versus her reality. And the children ask her, you know, where are you from? And she said, Edinburgh. But where are you really from? Edinburgh. Where's your dad from? Edinburgh. Where's your granddad from? Nigeria. Have you been there? No. And then Magna says, stop asking so many questions. And she said, no, I don't mind. But clearly she is not of there. And so one of the things that was really important for me as a child to do was to really see the landscape that I was in, and to kind of wrap myself in it. And I really wanted a story like this when I was a child, and I never got it. And there's just a little anecdote that when Jane Ray showed me all the spreads of these images, that beautiful landscape that she created, that image, and it was so what I was imagining, I just burst into tears. And she said, Sita, you don't like them. You don't like the images. I'll start again. And I said, no, I had no idea that I had been longing to see these images from when I was a child. And, you know, academically, kind of people talk about, you know, the impact of lack of representation. But it was strange. And I've talked about it a lot. I've explored, you know, many stories of many different people, different cultures in my book. But I'd forgotten that childhood feeling of it. And it was Jane Ray's imagery in this story that kind of released that, oh my goodness, that's a little bit like we were when we were standing in Orkney on that lot, in that place. So landscape is always a character in my stories, and especially so in this one.
Yeah, pictures are really beautiful. Miriam, the first diversity event we ran, Michael Rosen was talking about it's not just about representation, but if you grow up as a Jewish child, it can be all about negative representation. He said, you know, around Easter time, that the Jews were the people who killed Jesus. I mean, you're telling such a positive story and such a relatable little boy and injecting humor into it. I mean, what kind of stories did you grow up with when you were young?
Well, you know, when you yeah, he's not wrong. I mean, it is very difficult growing up as a Jewish child. I mean, I was born after the Holocaust. You know, we knew jolly well what happened to the Jews on the continent. My grandmother would start by saying, my brother Louis was killed by the Nazis, and then she'd start crying. We never asked her anything else. I actually wrote a short pamphlet about him for the family because I went off and did the research. Nobody knew that he was deported from Paris and sent to Auschwitz and died a month later. You know, it took decades and decades for someone to rummage through and find out the story of our family. Both sets of grandparents came from Poland and they left because of the pogroms, and I knew that, you know. So I'm not saying we grew up being thoroughly miserable, but when you do look at Jewish history, it's not an easy story. And this is the problem that we have. I remember my son coming home when he was 10 years old and said, I know what happened to the Jews, they gassed them. But what did they do? Open the oven and put them in. And he'd had a talk, and I actually went and mentioned to the school, I think they were a bit young for it. So, and that was like the worst moment when he asked me about the Holocaust. You know, sex was easy. This, I wasn't ready. And, you know, I was never ready to talk about it with children, and we didn't have materials and things. So I think it's even more important that there are, you know, there's modern ways of telling stories. I mean, children's literature has evolved so much, and ways in which we can begin to open the door, because Jewish children will have a lot of questions to ask. It is a very specific history.
Of course, there's ways of telling it, because I loved that in Corey's Rock as well, that there's a story there about grief, about a child with disability. You've got so many other stories intertwined. Our audience, are you out there? Have you got any questions for our writers? Miriam, could I ask you about the illustrations? Because
yes,
I mean,
do.
I said I'm very keen on dogs.
Yes.
You chose Hanno as the focus here, and the illustrations are beautiful.
Here's my Hanno. I show it to the kids. And my 4-year-old grandson decided he had an injury, so he put a plaster on him, and I can't get it off. The kids love it. Yes, so my book, I was just so excited about this. I wasn't part of the illustrations. My book was illustrated by Karin Littlewood, who is an award-winning illustrator. There's her name on the front. And she illustrated right through the book. And I really felt that this turned the book into a beautiful artifact. The picture on the front page is when Hanno and Rudi are reunited after the 6 months quarantine. And Hanno's got his little label round his neck there. And now they've got the summer together, and Rudi has started to make friends. But if you look at the first illustration of Rudi bending over Hanno, he's picking the letters up from the mat. And because Rudi was stuck at home after Kristallnacht, that his parents wouldn't let him go outside. And when I do Zoom talks now, I sort of say to the kids, oh, we know what lockdown means. And he was stuck at home. So one of the things he did was to teach Hanno tricks. And he taught him to bring the letters. And then there is a picture of Lottie and Rudi with the Shabbat candles and the Shabbat bread, the challah, on the table. And this is the moment Lottie catches Rudi's eye, and he's looking at her thinking, why is she looking at me like that? And then their father tells them, you're going to England on a train to live with foster parents. And Rudi says, well, Hanno and me don't want to go. And then Papa says, actually, Hanno's not going. He can't go with, sorry. And this is, you know, when the sort of the bottom falls out of Rudi's world. And he arrives in England. He's lucky, he has very nice foster parents. Lottie's family treat her like a servant. So I tried to show the sort of two sides of the coin, that not every child was received into a loving home. And you can see him sitting there with his Uncle Don, and Rudi's in the middle, and Lottie's sitting there. She's made a card for him, but she doesn't really earn any money, so she can't buy him a present. And Uncle Don has wrapped up a pencil box in like 20 layers of paper, so they have fun taking it off. And he has a nice time, but he says it's not like all my parties back in Germany when I had all my friends. And the other picture is very significant, actually, because Rudi and his friend Emil are bullied by Hitler Youth back in Germany, and they bully all the Jewish children. And then one day his best friend Sydney says, we're going to go and see the scouts in the scout camp. And Rudi thinks, no, Hitler Youth. And he's terrified. But of course, they're not like Hitler Youth. They know he's Jewish. The leader knows he's come on the train. He also knows he doesn't eat pork sausages and gives him a cheese sandwich to eat. So it's a kind of, you know, and these are some of the beautiful pictures that Karin has illustrated. And again, it helps the children to go through this difficult story. And there are difficult moments. I mean, there's a point when Rudi goes to school and there's a Nazi teacher, and here's the pile of Nazi books, and you know, his normal teacher is thrown out, and he and Emil are hit across their legs, their bare legs, with a ruler. And actually, Lord Alf Dubs was on a radio program with me, and when I read that bit out, he just kept saying that was terrible, that was just so awful. So, you know, obviously a very difficult moment for somebody who had been in Czechoslovakia at that time.
There's a crucial moment when he has to leave his friend Emil, but he does make a new friend when he's in England. And I mean, you've got that, Sita, in your book as well, the importance of friendship in a child's book. Can you tell us a little bit about it, Sita, that story you have at the heart of yours?
Magnus P is the most adorable boy that's depicted by Jane, with incidental inclusion that he has a hearing aid. And we know when they sit together in class, Isla's very, very nervous about going to this school, which she walked to along the beach. It's a school called Hope. And she's a new girl. And she arrives there and there's an empty seat next to Magnus P. And he sits there and he just quietly watches her writing and drawing. And they become the most amazing friends. And it turns out that in another generation, Isla's mum and Magnus's mum were friends. So he's actually been told that he's got to look after her because they know that this sad thing has happened to his family. But there's just this beautiful, I'm looking for the image of Magnus P. You'll find it in the story. He is just a little boy that you can tell has got the empty seat beside him. And Isla goes and sits in that seat and they become bonded friends. Friendship is always, like, you know, Miriam was talking about, you know, you're writing in a way, you write about really big things and you know, the things that children are navigating in the world today. But you know, when you're writing to children, the tone is so important. And you know, there are kind of sad things that happen in this story, but she moves in and out of it, as Miriam was saying. And you know, she engages with the children at the playground. And friendship, I think, is the way that you can kind of move forward for the children and give them a future beyond what the adults have done in a story. So, you know, although quite often I have people with lots of generations in my stories, to keep the focus on the child, to keep it child-centered is always really important. And, you know, we all remember those friends we made in those difficult, you know, moments of our lives, our rites of passage moments. And Magnus P is a friend that I will never forget. So that's, I haven't found the picture of Magnus, but it is a beautiful picture, and it's them sitting next to each other on a desk on Isla's first day of school. I'm sure it will come up before we finish, and I'll be able to put it in front of the camera.
Just realised it's 5:02. We need to finish soon. One more question for you, Miriam. I mean, as I said, Sita is, you know, you've got a child with disability, you've got loss, grief, coming to terms, really big questions. And Miriam, in your story too, you've got this class issue coming up. I mean, you can do such a lot in children's books. And I thought that friendship was very interesting on class grounds.
Yes, this is my sort of interest in social history, and my sort of quite fierce thing about the generation after the First World War. The men came home from the war. In fact, Sydney's father has been quite sort of injured. He's been gassed and he can't work properly. So the income for this family, they're quite a large family, it's very intermittent and there's very little help for them. And yet actually Sydney is a gifted child. It doesn't come out in this book, it comes out, he appears in the emergency zoo. And so he's a child who is very disadvantaged, and he's disadvantaged because his father was injured fighting in the last war. And, you know, and so that between the wars, the social inequalities, and, you know, the fact that actually many people said, well, OK, we'll fight your war for you this time round against Hitler. But after that, everything's got to change. And of course, we know 1945, you know, the whole world changed in this country, and Churchill wasn't re-elected. So he kind of represents that population in England who were really struggling. And most of the time, Sydney is just hungry. You know, and Rudi has, you know, a bag full of sandwiches to share. He can't wait to get to the scout camp because he wants his sausage roll. He wants what the scouts are cooking. And Rudi, in his mind, thinks, I'm going to be plunged right in the middle of Hitler Youth. And what am I going to do? You know, so they're coming from such different poles, which, and that I think is what's interesting in what Sita has said, that where this chemistry of friendship happens is fascinating, really. Sydney picks up German really quickly, and Rudi thinks that's amazing. And as soon as Rudi says something in German, he parrots it straight back. He remembers it. And Rudi thinks, wow, he wants to learn German. And Sydney tells him, well, it'll be useful in the war. Because they all know it's coming. It's August 1939, and they know what's coming.
Just one question, because we really do have to stop. You talked, Miriam, about using the present tense, and somebody in the audience has asked, Sita, both books are in the first person, both in the present tense. Why did you decide to put yours in first person present tense, Sita?
Okay, first of all, just before I forget, there it is.
Oh yeah, it's lovely.
There they are. And this is this thing about connection. Here is the Yoruba beadwork, and also the Celtic cloth and friendship. I put it in first person. Artichoke Heart in the States is called Mira in the present tense. And Mira in Artichoke Heart tells Pat Print, the writing tutor, that she can only write in the present tense sometimes about some things. And that's how this story came. It just couldn't come in another voice. It could only come in the first person voice. It was written like a monologue, like somebody speaking directly out. I mean, when I read it, even though I can't do the Edinburgh accent, but it reads like a monologue until you get to the points at which she goes to school. So it absolutely was her internal voice, and that's what I heard, and that's what I laid down on the page. That's how it felt when I wrote this story. I was literally laying it down on the page. I could hear her voice straight away.
Oh, thank you. And thank you both very much. I really heartily recommend the stories. They're really very good. Thank you very much to Arts Council England, specifically for funding our wonderful interpreter, Lauren Lister. Thank you, Lauren. Thanks, Pippa, for organising, and thank you, Simon, for hosting it. All the best to both of you, Miriam and Sita, and I hope your books do as well as they deserve to. They're great. Thanks and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Lauren.